Hey guys, Rob here. Just before we get started, I want to let you know that this episode will be talking about sexual content. Listener discretion is advised. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Anxiety Monkeys podcast. I'm your host, Rob, and joining me here in the studio is my co-host, Michelle.
Hello, everyone. What a lovely Saturday it is.
Okay, so our first item is from Vice India, and I'll put a link in the show notes. I apologize that it's a Facebook video. I couldn't seem to find any actual better sources for it, but it's been making the rounds on Facebook, so I figured I'd kind of share it with you guys. Basically what it is, a guy named Sergi Santos invented a blowjob robot. Now, when the video starts, he's in with a reporter and the general manager of an adult bookstore in the bookstore demoing the robot. Then it cuts to a shot of him attaching the head to a robot, I guess just to prove that it's more than a head that gives head. That's where it makes the turn from odd to entirely creepy, because then he starts talking to the reporter about how if he's got a sex robot and he knows the person in question, then he can use the robot to control the person. I initially thought it was just a language thing. If you watch the video, I get the impression that English isn't Sergei's first language, and I'm not going to dunk on him for that. But he launches into this mini monologue where he talks about using sex robots to control people, and it becomes pretty obvious that that's exactly what he's talking about doing, which struck me as just creepy as hell.
Is it possible that he was trying to say that once he's comfortable interacting with the robot, that he would be more comfortable interacting with women?
That's a distinct possibility, and I wonder if that's what he meant. But if that's what he meant, it certainly didn't come off that way. Anyway, so the video cuts back to the adult bookstore where Sergei has taken the face off the robot. He's demonstrating the sensors, showing it off, then he puts the face back on, and then he proceeds to put his finger in the mouth to demonstrate the sensors and how when you trip the sensor, it begins simulating a blowjob. The general manager of the adult bookstore puts her finger in to experience it for herself, and shortly after that, Sergei mentions, yeah, it feels good, doesn't it? Yeah, I've tested this on myself, which means she basically just put her finger in a place where some random dude has been jacking baby butter. They then take a dildo and talk about putting it in the robot's mouth, but yeah, that wasn't putting it in, that was jamming it in. So then the video closes out with him talking about how he'd been flirting with women in an effort to obtain sex, and how that didn't seem to work out, and how he figures that most men would prefer sex robots to women because I guess you're guaranteed to get sex with the robot. I mean, God forbid you should actually get to know a woman, whether or not you have sex with her. I guess if there's one good thing that comes out of having these sex robots on the market, is that it gives incels something better to do than to commit mass shootings. Now, Michelle, you also found some other videos that we'll include in the show notes that talk about sex robots as well. And I went ahead and watched those, and I have a couple of thoughts as well. First, I find it kind of interesting that they go through all this effort to program simulated personalities to delve into AI, and yet every one of these sex robots sounds like my fucking GPS unit. I don't know what the deal is with that. The other thing that I noticed is that all of these guys look like they came out of the same mold. Full disclosure, I wrote a paper on the subject of sex robots in my engineering ethics class back when I was in college, and there's a picture from an article on CNN where it's this, bald-headed, skinny guy with just the creepiest sex robot I've ever seen in my life. I mean, this thing is definitely a denizen of the uncanny valley. I guess they went through the effort of faking a woman. For me to take advantage of that, I'd have to figure out how to fake an erection. Speaking of the uncanny valley, Michelle, do you know what the uncanny valley is?
Yes, I do. Basically, it describes how the more human a robot looks, the more uncomfortable humans are when they experience it.
Right, and if I remember correctly, it has something to do with the smaller differences becoming more noticeable and amplifying until a person is just completely uncomfortable with it. It's almost like there's an area where we're comfortable with the robot, and then as it gets more and more human-like, the less comfortable we get with it. But a moment ago, I'd mentioned that I'd written a paper on the topic of sex robots back when I was in college, and I wish I'd held on to it, but unfortunately I didn't. But I think, if I remember correctly, I basically made the argument that sex robots could have applications in helping the disabled community. And at the time, it seemed like a pretty clever argument, pretty woke. But I was basically full of shit. If you ask a blind person what they want, I'm pretty sure they're not going to go, hey, let me get that dog and go ahead and give me a stick. They'd want medical science to be working on helping them see. But that's all supposition on my part. I'm not disabled. I'm not in any position to speak for the disabled community. I think really what I should have said at the time and what I'd say now basically boils down to these things have come onto the market. There's a group of people who want to use them. It's not hurting anybody. Let them have their sex robots. I think part of it's just the puritanical streak that seems to be inherent to most of us who are in America just because we are Americans and we have that puritanical streak. I mean, we've got some funny attitudes when it comes to sex, sexuality, sex toys. Although there is one thing I do want to point out. I do find it kind of ironic that when it comes to sex toys, this is one of the very few areas in society where women seem to have it better than men. Sex toys for men tend to fall into one of two categories. They're either cheap things that you can order off of Wish.com, which I wouldn't fuck with a stolen dick, or they're sex robots that roughly cost you about as much as a new car would. On the other hand, women basically knocked it out of the park. They have the Hitachi magic wand, which in the sex toy market is basically the 800-pound gorilla in the room. I mean, they could have basically just stopped there and called it a day. And on that note, here's a word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Pages Printed Plastics. You can visit us at pagesprintedplastics.com. That's P-A-I-G-E-S printedplastics.com. We have a couple of different printers. We can do design as well as print. We can print anything from small figures like D&D miniatures to larger objects like computer parts, toys, props, pretty much anything you can imagine. So feel free to check us out. Again, that's pagesprintedplastics.com. And we're back. For this next segment, we're going to do something a little bit different. So grab some popcorn, maybe grab something to drink, and join us for story time with Uncle Rob. First, let me set the scene. It was the late 90s, Southern California, summer. I was 19 years old and in vocational school. My friend and I were getting ready to take the entrance exam for a union for the vocation that we'd been studying. We'd spent the previous couple of weeks pretty much sequestered, doing nothing but 8 hours of study a day. So the morning of the exam, we loaded up, headed to the exam site, and went in to take the test. Out of the 40 or so people that were there, we were the two youngest people there. It was a couple of hours of exam, basically just algebra stuff, nothing too terribly complex. And within a couple of days of taking the exam, we got our results back. I don't remember if he scored top and I came in second, or if I scored top and he came in second, but either way, it wasn't even close. We blew out pretty much everybody there, which was great news. And then they informed me that based on our scores, we could expect to have jobs within about 3 months. The thing to keep in mind is that we were vying for spots as new apprentices. In order for us to get hired, everybody else on the apprentice list had to be working as well. But 3 months wasn't going to do it for me. I needed a job, and I needed one pretty much right there on the spot. I was planning to be married within 3 months, so I was kind of in a bind. And then one of my classmates informed me that the adult bookstore in the downtown of where I grew up was hiring. Now, I already knew about this place. One of my friends had taken me there on my 18th birthday in a bid to try to shock me. I don't think that worked out very well, but, whatever. So I went in, I put in an application, and it didn't take long for them to get back to me to say that they wanted me to come in for an interview. I was anticipating that it would be at the same store where I filed the application, which wouldn't have been a problem. I could have walked, or I could have taken a bus. It wouldn't have been a big deal. Instead, they informed me that they wanted me to come to their headquarters, which was in the next city over. For this, I was going to need a car. Walking definitely wasn't an option, and if I'd taken the bus, it would have taken me about half the day, and I would have arrived just a sweaty mess. So I talked to my dad, asked him if I could borrow the car. He basically shot me down with no explanation. None of my friends had a car at the time, so I turned to the only person I could ask for help in this situation, my grandmother. Now, this was a calculated risk. The building where I had filed the application was a pink stucco building with a small sign out front that said, "For discriminating adults." There was really nothing out there to advertise, "Hey, we're an adult bookstore." So I called her up. I asked her if I could get a ride, for my interview, and she said no problem. Didn't ask me what the job was, and I didn't volunteer. So the day of the interview, she picks me up, drives me over there, and it becomes painfully obvious this is not a construction firm. This was not the small pink stucco building with a small sign out front. This was a large glass structure, huge windows. And in the windows are posters of Jenna Jameson and other porn stars that were popular in the late 90s. Now, they're all wearing bikinis and everything, but still, it's pretty obvious what this place is. So I don't say anything to her. She parks the car, I get out, I walk in. I inform the lady working at the cash register that I'm here for an interview. And she says, "Sure, no problem. I'll go get the manager. You just kind of hang out here and take a look around while I do that." So I took her up on her offer. Seemed like a good idea to me at the time. At this point, I was still basically a kid. Yeah, I'd been working for a while, but you could count the number of job interviews I'd actually had on one hand. So I cruised past the VHS tapes, past the adult magazines, started looking at the rest of the general merchandise. I don't remember most of what was there. I would imagine you could probably take a look at, any website like adamandeve.com or whatever and get a feel for what I was seeing. But there was one item that definitely jumped out at me. It was a dildo called the Manhandler. Now, they use the term marital aids to describe these things euphemistically when they don't want to say sex toys. The only thing this was going to aid was a trip to the ER if you actually tried to use it. It was a big black dildo, Luke Skywalker black. The thing must have been about 2 feet long and a good couple of inches in diameter. It had a nutsack on it the size of both of my fists put together, and underneath the nutsack was a handle. My first thought on seeing this thing was I could buy a couple of these things and my brother and I could stage sword fights at the mall with them, which would have gotten our asses kicked by the police department. And this being the era before social media, I wouldn't have even had any likes or shares or retweets or anything to show for my efforts. But I wasn't left alone too long. The manager came out eventually, and I guess I'll describe him starting with his feet. He had a pair of pointed-toed black boots with heels, tight leather pants. I mean, you could practically read the dates on the change in his pockets. A mesh shirt with his nipple piercings visible, and above that, makeup. Now, understand, I'm not trying to other this guy. And I'm using, he, him, guy. I'm using masculine pronouns advisedly because when I asked the woman working at the cash register for the manager, she said, "I'll go get him." It's just what I found funny was the contrast. Looking at him and then look at me. I was wearing my dress shoes, polished, black slacks, white shirt, short sleeve, black tie. Hell, I wouldn't have been out of place if I'd started bitching about a pointy-haired boss. Or if I'd had shorter hair and a name tag, you'd be forgiven for thinking I was going to give you a copy of the Book of Mormon. Anyway, we go into his office, we start talking. It's the usual job interview type stuff, looking at my resume, pointing out that, with all this computer experience, I should be able to operate a cash register. One of the places where I'll give him, real credit was that he avoided the stereotypical job interview type questions. There was no, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Hopefully not selling dildos. But one of the things that did stand out from the interview was at one point he gets very serious with me. And he says something along the lines of, "This is a serious job. There's a certain gravity associated with it, and I need to know that you can handle that." He points to this industrial-sized canister of Annalise lube and says, I need to know that you can handle selling this to somebody without making them feel awkward. And I basically got through that by saying, sure, I think I can do that. I don't think it'll be a problem. I'm a serious person. I'm going to take this job seriously. So we conclude the interview, and I walk back out. I get in the car with my grandmother. I don't say anything. As we're pulling out of the driveway, she says to me, Robert, I want you to be careful. I know what kind of people visit these stores. That's all she had to say on the subject, which raised more questions in my mind that I was not going to ask. Anyway, a few days later, I get the call. They decided to go with somebody who they felt was more qualified to work in their store. I got to be honest with you. To this day, I'm curious. I would have loved to have met that person. What makes somebody more qualified than me to sell sex toys? But the story does have a happy ending, because a couple of days after that, I did get a call from another interview I had attended where I actually got a job in the vocation I'd been training for. And on that note, here's another word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Pages Printed Plastics. You can visit us at pagesprintedplastics.com. That's P-A-I-G-E-S, printedplastics.com. We have a couple of different printers. We can do design as well as print. We can print anything from small figures like D&D miniatures to larger objects like computer parts, toys, props, pretty much anything you can imagine. So feel free to check us out. Again, that's pagesprintedplastics.com. And we're back. And for our final segment today, Michelle wants to talk about the history of vibrators. Michelle, why don't you take it away?
Well, there is quite a bit of a history with vibrators. The electric vibrator was invented in the late 19th century as a medicinal instrument for pain relief and treatment of various ailments in men and women.
Yeah, hysteria being one of those, if I'm not mistaken.
That is correct. Vibrators also began to be marketed for home use in magazines from around 1900, together with other electrical household goods for their supposed health and beauty benefits.
Yeah, you shared a link with me, and I looked at some of these ads, and they look very much like the patent medicine ads, like you'd see for like Coca-Cola or other products of the time. What does crack me up, though, are some of these quotes from an ad from 1913. Now, taken out of context, they're absolutely hilarious. Let me see here. I have gained 20 pounds since June by using the machine daily. Okay. We also use it for weak, granulated, watery eyes. Well, yeah, doesn't masturbation cause blindness? It has cured me of chronic constipation of over 3 years standing. Well, A, don't stand for 3 years, and B, talk about getting the shit shaken out of you. A friend of mine took 3 treatments with it and it cured his dandruff. Okay, I have questions. I have three of your vibrators in use in my office. Okay, either worst workplace ever or best? I'm not entirely sure which.
I mean, obviously, the constipation one must have been a guy, and just picturing the use of a vibrator there is just astronomical.
Okay, judgy.
And then curing dandruff, what do? Hold it to your head to shake all the dandruff off?
Well, that would be one way to do it. Maybe you could use it on your shoulders, get the same effect.
Now, the ads in the magazines did eventually disappear in the 1920s due to pornography and better education about the female sexual function.
Well, and that kind of leads me to another question as well. It seems obvious to me that nobody was coming out and saying, hey, if you put this on your hoo-ha, it'll help you get off. At least not in public, not in the ads. Kind of an underground word-of-mouth sort of thing going on there.
And I recently have checked this fact, and it is still it is still going on. And any listeners in Alabama, you have my sympathy. You really, truly do. It is illegal to buy a sex toy in Alabama. The name of the law is the Anti-Obscenity Enforcement Act of 1998. Under this law, Any citizen in Alabama cannot buy a sex toy without a doctor's written note.
Now, I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall for some of those conversations, but it also kind of reminds me of another law that was struck down in Texas that was very similar, where apparently you couldn't purchase more than 2 sex toys. I guess they kind of looked around and decided, well, we have Ted Cruz, so we're good for 1 huge dildo. 1 is all anybody else should need beyond that. Well, folks, that's going to do it for us this week. Thank you for joining us. You can find us on most of the major podcast markets, and if you'd review us and give us a 5-star review, that will help others find us. We're on Twitter at AnxietyMonkies, Facebook at facebook.com/AnxietyMonkies, and you can email us at anxietymonkies@gmail.com. And finally, if you've got a couple of bucks you can throw our way, you can do that at patreon.com/AnxietyMonkies, or go in for a one-time donation at paypal.me/AnxietyMonkies.
Oh, and I want to say a quick thank you to Mike for giving us the feedback.
Yes, thank you, Mike, for the 5-star review. Big help. Much appreciated. And until next week, she's Michelle, I'm Rob, and we're your Anxiety Monkeys.